Can you name the perfect steps of bonding protocol from ПАСКАЛЯ МАНЬЕ?
Yes, of course. So I think you have to consider two situations, right? But they are very similar. They are direct bonding and immediate dentin sealing. But basically, it's the same protocol of bonding. First, I'm going to focus on dentin bonding because enamel bonding, I think everybody knows, right? It's etching from 20-30 seconds with phosphoric acid, 35-37%, rinsing, drying. I remember when I deliver restorations that are on preparations that have been already dentin sealed, right, with IDS, immediate dentin sealing. When I deliver an inlay, an onlay, or a veneer, I like to alcohol dry the enamel. I use alcohol to dry the enamel. You cannot do that when you do direct bonding to enamel and dentin because that would dehydrate the dentin. So for dentin bonding specifically, the first step is if your tooth has endodontic treatment. Now you are dealing with not only dentin, but you are dealing with exposed gutta perca and canal sealer, right? And that means when you apply your dentin bonding agent, which has solvent in the primer or acetone and alcohol, you are going to interact with the canal sealer, with the cement in the canal. And so you are going to dissolve the cement, you are going to create a smear that is not going to have a good effect on the dentin bond. And so the first step when you have a tooth with a root canal treatment is to create a small barrier with glass ionomer. So I will always isolate the canal from the rest of the dentin by placing a small glass ionomer barrier on top of the canals. Then you can start your bonding procedure. You can start etching. Okay, actually there's one more step before etching, very important, is freshly cutting the dentin. And because I use a total etch adhesive, I'm going to use a diamond, actually a coarse diamond. And again, recent research that we did show that if you cut the dentin with a coarse diamond, in addition to preheating your appropriate adhesive system, you can get bond strength in the order of 70 megapascal. I like to joke and say mega me, 70,000 pascals. Imagine the strength of 70,000 pascals. So preheating the adhesive, and that means you need a unidose system because adhesives cannot be preheated in a bottle. They have to be in a rocket delivery system. So we use a rocket version of OptiBond FL. Then you need to roughen the dentin with a coarse diamond. But as you know, this works only with total etch adhesives, because when you roughen dentin with a coarse diamond, you are going to create a very thick layer of smear. And that smear is not good for self-etch adhesives. So if you use a self-etch adhesive, you have to clean the dentin. There is one additional step, then that's why it doesn't make sense to me, because you want to use a simplified adhesive, but you have more steps to do. So it's counterproductive. So with a self-etch adhesive, after cutting your dentin with a diamond, a coarse diamond, why a coarse diamond? Because it's going to make the dentin very irregular. Very
like the waves.
And exactly, your dentin is going to look like the surface of the ocean when there's a storm, right? With all these waves. And these waves, what do? They increase the surface of contact. which is a basic principle in adhesion in general. You want a rough surface, right? When you etch enamel, what do you create? You create a rough surface. And so the dentino enamel junction is a multi-scalloped rough interface. And the coarse diamond is doing that. So if you are asking me Pascal Mann protocol, number one, you have to roughen dentin, freshly cut and roughen dentin with a coarse diamond. That is going to generate a thick smear layer that is easily eliminated by total etch system. So you are going to etch the dentin. And now you can, the beauty of total etch systems is that you can differentiate between old sclerotic dentin and young freshly cut dentin by choosing an appropriate etching time. And the younger the dentin, the shorter the time, right? So this young freshly cut dentin, you are going to etch only maybe for 10 seconds, while the sclerotic dentin, you can extend your etching time to 20, 25 seconds. And that's the beauty of total etch. Now you can take into account the type of dentin, you see? After etching and rinsing and careful drying, you want to have a dry dentin, but not dehydrated dentin. Then you apply the primer. The primer is basically water and alcohol or other solvents. And you have to basically gently massage the dentin with the micro brush, which is going to infuse the collagen network. We know that with a total etch, you will have a depth of demineralization of about 3 microns, 4 microns. And the longer you give the primer, the time to infuse that demineralized layer, the better will be your bond. So I usually apply the primer for several times, several coats, 20 seconds each, with a gentle massage movement to really favor the penetration of the primer into the dentin. After that, you gently eliminate all the excess fluid from the surface of dentin. So basically, you don't uh, dehydrate again the dentin, you eliminate the excess of solvent. That means this moving layer of fluid on the surface of dentin. And you do that with air and suction. And once it's done, you see a shiny dentin. You know, yesterday I was in the student clinic, I apply my primer as long as I told you several layers, and then we dry the primer and the surface of dentin looks completely dull. That means the dentin has completely absorbed the primer. In that case, you need to reapply the primer and give more primer, because when you dry the primer, even though you eliminate the fluid layer on the surface of dentin, you should have a shiny dentin surface. Once this is done, you are going to apply the resin coating, which is the adhesive, bottle number 2 in the case of OptiBond FL. And that's a very important component. I will always favor a system that has a separate adhesive resin coating, right? Which is also the case of SE bond, for instance. But that resin coating should not be thin, or if it is thin, it has to be doubled with a layer of flowable composite, right? In the case of OptiBond FL, because that layer is filled 48% in weight, when you apply the adhesive, it will make a uniform resin coating, which, very important, in addition of being uniform and thick, it is radio opaque. Not many adhesives are radio opaque, and you want them radio opaque. You know, the other day I have a case, I see this uniform empty gap on the X-ray, and you are like, what is it? Is it a gap or is it an unfilled adhesive? You don't know. So having a radio opaque adhesive system is extremely important.
Yeah.
Amazing, huh? And so you apply your adhesive, you light cure it, and it's going to light cure properly if it is thick enough, which means what thickness? More than 30-40 micron. It has to be more than 30-40 micron. And believe me, many adhesives, simplified adhesives that are air thinned because they need to be air thinned because of the solvent, they end up less than that. And that 30-40 micron is exactly the thickness of the oxygen inhibition layer. Now you understand how everything is coming around together. Once the adhesive has been light cured, then you can proceed whether it is layering your composite or adding composites for geometric reasons in case of inlays, onlays. You can line additional composite onto the adhesive to increase geometry, to fill in undercuts, to elevate a deep margin, to elevate a deep preparation, so that you stay within range of light curing the inlay when it's a thick restoration. And then once you have done all the above, then you start light curing the composite liner, and then air blocking and light curing again. In case of inlays, onlays, and veneers, I would take the burr after that and re-prep all my enamel margins. Yeah, I think that after you do your immediate dentin sealing, you can come back and carefully re-prep your enamel margins to have a clean margin. And because dentin sealing, immediate dentin sealing is not for enamel, it's mainly for dentin. So we like to keep the bonding to enamel to the stage of delivery of the inlay, onlay, or veneers. And I even use IDS for crowns, to be honest with you. So I think these were the Pascal-Magne bonding procedure. Remember the rough coarse diamond. Remember, you can preheat your adhesive. We use a little heater called CalCet device. You should not preheat the primer more than 10 minutes, I would say. Otherwise, it starts to evaporate too much solvent. In the rocket system of OptiBond FL, it's not such a problem because the primer is sealed in the Unidose system. But in general, we would never preheat the primer more than 10-15 minutes. The bonding resin can be preheated longer because it doesn't have so much solvents, right?
Thank you so much for this very useful answer for my
Yes.
question. It's very useful.